Hello, everybody. It's Michael Hollands once again for Sound of the Movies. Today I have the pleasure to be joined by the great Benjamin Wallfisch. This fantastic composer has written the scores for films such as The Escapist, Lights Out, Hidden Figures, A Cure for Wellness, It Chapter 2, Blade Runner 2049, Shazam, Hellboy, The Invisible Man, Mortal Kombat, and many more. It is my pleasure to welcome the great Benjamin Wallfisch.
Michael, you're too kind. Very nice to meet you. How you doing?
I'm doing just fine. How about you?
Good. Yeah, no complaints. Nice
Great.
to nice to talk finally.
Yes, I'm really glad we finally got to
Yeah,
uh, we finally got to make this work, and I'm really glad you took the time out of your busy schedule, Ben. I really appreciate that.
of course.
And at first, Ben, I would like to hear your thoughts on the experience of writing music for a narrative. The combination of finding the structure and balance between words, images, story, and the actors.
Hmm. I mean, it varies from movie to movie, but the thing which I think is common always is to kind of try and get down to the core motivations of both the characters but also the story. You know, where can music exist in a way that doesn't feel like it's just either background or too forced. It needs to feel kind of organic to the kind of the fabric of the movie. So there's a lot of questions and a lot of thinking, and if there is time, sometimes there isn't. Just trying to experiment away from picture. I love to write suites of material, which some of which I'll never play to anyone, but just for myself, experiments to just see if a particular style or tone or color feels comfortable and feels like it could fit with a film. I try to respond to the image, like to the cut, if I can, and often I'm reading scripts for meetings, and that's great so that you can have a discussion. But I try to sort of, once I've read a script, almost put it out of my mind and just wait until I see the performances and the way things are being paced and the cut and the tone, the production design and the style, just the overall, all the little details which are going to inform the musical choices. But the number one thing though is just to get inside the that motivation and find some, even something very small which you can hold on to, that results in a spark of an idea, a motif, a theme, even just a color, a tone, and then just sort of run with that and see where it takes you.
I would like to refer to music as the invisible yet, of course, very essential actor.
Yeah, it's interesting. If the movie allows for it, it doesn't always, but when it does, if you can be a character, so the score is almost like a partner to the audience, and they you can become attached to a theme or a particular chord progression, because it's quite hard to put your finger on why it makes you feel a certain way, but being a little bit bold or slightly left field so that it's memorable, not just for the sake of it, but because it's somehow connected to something in the film. That's where you can really you can be quite, you can definitely have that characterful tone that you're mentioning for sure.
Yes, and of course, needless to say, some films require a delicate score or a low key score, and others offer you the opportunity to be really bold and also, let's say, experiment a little more. So it always depends
Yeah,
on the movie. Yet, of course, the score is such a tremendous piece of the puzzle.
it's funny because even often the simpler and sort of quieter scores are the hardest to do. I mean, a movie was just coming out later this year, The Starling. It was one of the hardest scores I've ever done because it's deliberately so simple, and the orchestration is relatively small. But it was so satisfying to go through that process. It was quite a long time ago, actually, and just kind of when you're dealing with something without the full, possibilities of a large orchestra, or a genre movie like a horror or action or thriller or something, just something very personal. But that's where you have to really, you know, get to the heart of what you're trying to say as a musician. And yeah, there are very few places to hide.
When is Starling going to be released, actually?
I'm not sure the exact date, but I think it's later this year or early next year.
Right. And you already finished this, right?
Right. Yeah, I finished that quite a while ago, actually. Yeah, it's been sitting in a reel for for a long time, waiting for the right moment. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Looking forward to it. And Ben, I would like to talk just a little bit about your collaboration with Gore Verbinski, a director
Sure.
whom I really admire, and he's also directed A Cure for Wellness, a film which
Mm-hmm.
I really enjoyed. And it's, to me, this film was a really good blend of cinematography, editing, directing, storytelling, and also scoring. Would you say this was a perfect opportunity to combine musical elegance also with some hard hitting and also contemporary sounds?
I mean, look, in so many ways, that movie was a complete game changer for me personally, musically. It was it took an entire year, and it started out with a conversation with Gore, Hans Zimmer, and myself. Basically, Hans introduced me to Gore, and this was when he was still shooting. And there was this kind of immediate, like, I was just so fascinated. Firstly, I've always been just a massive fan of Gore's movies, of course, but his films have such there's such incredible intensity. Like, there isn't a single frame wasted, and the choices he makes are it's always so bold. And he's like that as a person. And, you know, when you speak to him, it's like you're in this incredibly intense conversation pretty much all the time, and that fascinates me. And in the end, I mean, when I started work on it, Gore just said, "Listen, I think it's best if you come to the cutting room and just set up your rig here and just start working." And this is going back to 2015, I think, or 16. I think 2016. Or no, it's 2015. And so this was around October. No, I'm getting the dates mixed up. It was around the end of that year. It was just after I got married, I think. And I was in that cutting room with Gore for the best part of a year, and it just was it was a game changer because it was the first time I've done a movie where I got to be in the trenches with the filmmaker literally every day. And we would have daily conversations over lunch. And more importantly for me, I got to see the intricacies of his process. And he actually set things up so that every post-production department was under one roof: VFX, sound design, editorial, music. We were all just literally in this building in Pasadena, all having lunch together, all working late. And Gore just has this incredible way of concentrating everyone's minds in a certain direction and then challenging. And so for me, it was this, he refused to show me the movie for the longest time. But he kept giving me like glimpses of certain scenes, like like a minute of one scene. And then he would ask me to write 10 or 15 minutes of music for that one scene that he would then use as temp for the film. And then once that's done, I would then actually score the scene. Sometimes using elements of what I'd done before, but often something completely new or more refined or whatever it was. And it was that kind of, it was the access I had to Gore and the depth. It was such in depth, and it was very intense and exhausting and physically draining. And certainly probably one of the most challenging things I've ever done. But at the end of it, there was a score I was incredibly proud of that had pushed me to my limits at that time. This is about 5 years ago now. But most importantly, I felt completely transformed in terms of how I approached the job of being a film composer. And I think that year with Gore, I just found myself thinking much more in terms of filmmaking first. And then the music just would flow from that. And at the end, I think I had dinner with Hans, or we had some drinks, and it was like, how did that go? And he said, "So Ben, you know what I just did? I just sent you to film school." he knew what an incredibly intense and important experience that would be. But it was that time with Gore to really just change everything about the way I thought about what this craft is, and every movie I've done since then has kind of been informed by that whole philosophy, where it's you're a filmmaker who creates music rather than a composer, and it's that's been a wonderful thing for me ever since, really. So yeah, I'm very, very grateful for that chance. And in terms of the music, it was a it's such a bonkers movie. I mean, it's so extreme, and so there's the dark humor in it too.
Yes.
Plus unbelievable horror and like the worst kind of terror you can think of. It's just very strange but weirdly beautiful, and he wanted to kind of like bridge that gap between slightly too sweet Tchaikovsky waltzes and ballet music with, you know, extreme Nine Inch Nails kind of craziness, you know, electronic craziness, and also just a sense of almost like the sort of Germanic precision. There was a lot of areas to cover, but for me personally, it was a bit of a game changer. It's a very long answer, so I'll leave it there.
And a very good answer too, Ben. Thank you very much. Thank you. And I bet this kind of quote unquote training, or this kind of intense experience probably also helped you get through film which has the scale of a Blade Runner, probably, right?
Yeah, I mean, Blade Runner was a completely different situation, but yeah, I think pretty much ever since I finished that movie, I felt very different about the process, and in a good way, and also the emphasis on sweets. Gore Verbinski was the first time I really just invested a lot of time writing away from picture, and the freedom I discovered in that to be even more creative. And yeah, Blade Runner was, I mean, to this day, I'm just so honored to have been a part of something so iconic. You know, the original movie is one of my absolute favorite and most important films to me personally. And
yes,
and then yeah, when Hans invited me in the room, and you know, we had these initial meetings with Denis and Joe Walker, I knew this was one of those moments where it was all about just putting every ounce of I mean, it's always like that. You always put your all into something, but this was very special. And also for me, it was an opportunity to write an entirely electronic score and do it in collaboration with one of my dear friends. And, you know, Hans has obviously been a mentor figure for me for, I mean, nearly 9 years now. And he's, you know, if you're going to put Blade Runner in front of someone, you put it in front of Hans. His legacy as someone with synthesizers, and his, you know, what he's done to electronic music in film scores is, you can't really compare it. I mean, Vangelis is the only person really who's, you know, he's very much in that. You follow on from those footsteps in a way, even though it's very different. And Blade Runner for me was an opportunity to kind of write something symphonic, but without a symphony orchestra, and to have the same emotional impact. But where there's not a single live instrument. Well, there was a couple, but very few. It's the synthesizers are the orchestra, and what an incredible filmmaker and story, and yeah, I mean, there's so much to say about that movie.
Absolutely, and the score and also the film, or the films, they feel or felt modern, yet they have a timeless quality.
Right. Well, it is, and what I loved about Blade Runner 2049 is, you know, the cut just took its time, and we were allowed to absorb the story at its own pace, and it's a pace of filmmaking which we've almost lost in, and you have to really kind of engage so consciously with the acting and with the cinematography, and it gave so much space for the score to be in many ways quite minimal, but you know, just sort of say a lot with very little at times. And so when it comes time to unleash the massiveness, like we did at the end of the score with the seawall sequence, for example, you know, there's a sense of contrast and perspective there.
Yes, great. Thank you very much. And Ben, before we dive right into the world of Mortal Kombat, I would just like to briefly cover Stephen King's It, as I am a huge fan of the novel, and I just love the 90s TV version of it, which gave me nightmares when I was a teenager. It was just to me personally, one of the most effective horror films of all time. And then Andy Muschietti directed It and It Chapter 2, which is actually closer to the Stephen King novel than the TV adaptation was. What can you tell me about scoring the modern horror movie based on a classic novel by Stephen King and your collaboration with Andy Muschietti?
Well, it was interesting because I've been aware of that TV show for the longest time, that the TV series originally, and of course my friend Richard Bellis wrote one of the most beautiful scores for that. But I deliberately didn't listen to it. I hadn't actually seen the TV show or heard Richard's score until after I completed the first score, and I was really glad I didn't, because it's so beautiful. And this was just one of those films where, I mean, here's a filmmaker with such a powerful vision and such focus on emotion and character. I mean, Andy is just, he's so, I mean, the way he managed to get that level of range of emotion from such a young cast, I don't think it's ever, I can't think of a movie actually that's managed to achieve that. And the whole thing about the It story is that the focus is not so much on the horror. It's this journey of these young people and finding their way. You know, the Losers Club, a collection of kids who feel in some way disjointed from society for one reason or another, but they find solace in each other, and they then are forced to work together and survive together against this insane force of the shape-shifting entity. You know, this idea that without each other we won't survive, but that told through a story where there's humor and true emotional connection. The acting, the dialogue, it just gave me as a composer this unbelievable canvas to just start with something which was entirely about those young people from the Losers Club, and then contrast that with some very strange. The horror choices were, it's very unlike like a score like Annabelle, for example, which is a much more sort of classical horror score.
Yes.
The whole tone in for Pennywise is this kind of demented child almost, and it's beyond evil because it's a glitchy seduction. You know how he lures his victims. He attempts to be appealing, but it glitches and it's not quite right. It's off a little bit, and it's that little bit offness is what I try to capture whenever. You know, in fact, pretty much the whole score has something strange, because the idea is that Pennywise is omnipresent. It's it's not just the clown, but he kind of infects everything around him as a sort of entity. You know, every 27 years. You know, you could focus on that, and then it's very one-sided, and it's almost as if it's an adventure film. It's a sort of almost in the tradition of Amblin and adventure films in the 80s. It takes that was the inspiration in many ways for the tone of the movie and the score, and then on top of that we added all of the craziness to depict Pennywise and his whole energy.
Thank you, Ben. And now let's talk about Mortal Kombat. I mean, I feel we could go on about your other projects probably until the wee hours of the morning, but I'm afraid we don't have that much time. So
Sure.
So I would like to talk about Mortal Kombat and your job to preserve the legacy and to go beyond that. How would you describe your process of writing the musical screenplay for this particular movie?
It started with a lot of questions for myself, which when I got the call to meet with the director, I was firstly fascinated because I remember playing the game in London in the arcades back in the early 90s, and I wasn't a huge gamer, but I do remember that quite distinctly because it was so violent and crazy, like there was nothing else like it. And of course I remembered the classic tune, which is so iconic, the Techno Syndrome. it's so iconic to the game, to the original, the first two movies back in the 90s. And, whenever you think of Mortal Kombat, you hear that Techno Syndrome riff. So pretty much when I put the phone down, I was thinking about it, because it's important to obviously go to a meeting with some ideas. And I realized that, look, if I'm going to do the score, I need to know for myself that I could do something with that tune, because it would be, it just wouldn't feel like a Mortal Kombat. It wouldn't feel like it's in the Mortal Kombat world unless we somehow embrace that. So I started experimenting with that tune, which is really simple. It's basically 3 notes, dun 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 dun, and what could be done with that. And I just started slowing it right down, reharmonizing it. There's another riff in there which, if you slow right down, then I realized actually, here we have 2 themes. Actually, if you add certain harmonies and treat one more like an ostinato that can be kind of bubbling underneath something else. And then I thought, okay, this actually has legs. And I ended up just kind of writing a 5-minute experiment, pretty much. It was done very quickly. It was pretty rough. But I brought that along to the first meeting, and just had it on my laptop just in case the conversation went in that direction of, how can we use this tune? And played to him, and the director really liked it, and we sort of took it from there. And it was just it was a really great collaboration. Actually, unfortunately, it was all, like so many of us this last year and a half, just figuring out how to do it in the middle of COVID.
Yes,
because we spotted the film, I think it was like February 20th or something, or even like first week of March, just when things were released last year, 2020, just as things were starting to get really bad. And the entire process, from all the playback meetings, for the director, for the studio, for the scoring sessions, everything was done over Zoom and various other internet apps, and it was really hard. Actually, I've never done a movie like that before, and but we got there. It just meant that the process just took that much longer, really, especially the scoring process, because we could only have I think it was 25 or 30 musicians playing together at one time.
Okay.
So it's such a large sort of symphonic sound we needed. So there was a ton of overdubs, which obviously makes the recording time much longer. We did 10,000 plus takes, which is insane because of the overdubs.
Well, crazy.
I hope never to get near that number ever again. And it's just testament to those incredible musicians and their stamina, that they could do that. And we did it. And a team of about 4 people edited all the takes into this thing, something that could be mixed. And then it made it to the screen. But the process was really just about like finding ways to use, it was sort of 2 things, like how do we use the original Techno Syndrome material, plus obviously create a universe of brand new themes, because there's so many characters, and just finding a way to have that range of character themes which are not entirely derivative from the Techno Syndrome, but to have their own life. And then just finding a sound which depicts Outworld, one that depicts Raiden, and also just something where there's always that hint of the original sort of franchise, always in the DNA. Sort of went from there, really.
Great. And when I watched the film, and I actually watched the film before I listened to the score, I felt, or I detected, there must have been quite a few challenges. I mean, producing a new version of Techno Syndrome and giving it a really good modern twist, and also finding music which is appropriate in terms of the sound of as far as the combat sequences are concerned. Following the images and also the fight choreography.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's 2 really good things you bring up there. I mean, firstly, the reinvention of Techno Syndrome for the end credits. That was something that I was sort of asked to do towards the end of the process, but I absolutely loved the process because I've always been a big fan of electronic music, electronic dance music, especially since the 90s. I was very much into into rave music and jungle music back in the 90s, and the Prodigy and all these bands back then. It just fascinated me as a teenager, and I've never lost that fascination. And even though I'm very aware I was using kind of subgenres of EDM from, which aren't current, that was deliberate because I wanted it to feel like a celebration of electronic music. So, because in so many ways, Techno Syndrome kind of lit the fuse for this sort of mainstream breakout of EDM, which we see today, which is it's just these enormous festivals and events based on open music. But back then it was still quite underground. And so it was the idea of just using that sort of electro house sound, which is, directly connected to that original house, the techno vibe of the original, but then take us on a journey through other genres. There's some dubstep, there's some big house. Big room. As you can tell, it's not entirely my world at all. I'm just a fan, but just kind of being in the world for a few weeks and just like celebrating it. That was what I wanted to try and bring to that track, and just above all, just make it feel like it was, it's like the fireworks at the end of a movie, and just like you want to just celebrate this great franchise and great original track. Really, it's such a. I mean, I knew a lot of people might not like it because, how dare you attempt to reinvent something so iconic? So I knew it was there was a lot of pressure, but I just knew that as long as it felt fun and very intense, then it would feel. Firstly, it just had to work at the end of the film. I had to feel like a payoff. So that was the sort of motivation there, and then the fight sequences. Yeah, the performances are extraordinary, and the choreography of the fights. It's quite hard to compare it with anything recent, because it's just so intense and non-stop. And for me, it was all about tempo. And actually, I realized that so much of the time, you've got to kind of pace things on a very grand scale, on a big scale. So, because there's so many fight sequences, you don't want it just to be like, okay, here's the fight music that you always hear. So I tried to make it so that as we go through the movie, the tempo is accelerating bit by bit until you get to the big final duel between Scorpion and Sub-Zero, and we are at the most intense version of that music. And you're feeding little motifs here and there throughout that kind of come to a climax. But in the end, it's somehow balancing the thing where you're trying to hit every move, but also not make it feel bitty. And it was very challenging. In the end, we were going to record it with live percussion, but some of these cues were just so fast and crazy that we decided to make most of the percussion electronic. And then the grander music be played live.
Which aspect, character, or scene of the film provided moments of inspiration for your first musical ideas?
It's Raiden, really, as a character. This idea of he's the sort of benevolent thunder god. He's like the father of the Earthrealm's fighters. That's his role. The great protector, and I knew his theme needed to be directly connected to the lore of the original, and that's where slowing down that 3-note Techno Syndrome motif to a fraction of the original speed, but then completely reharmonized in such a way that it could modulate and climb and build. That was a great starting point, because there was a sense of I wanted to feel like it was very old. It had a huge amount of history to it, and the music itself, there's a sort of mysticism almost.
Great.
That was the starting point.
In the case of Mortal Kombat, did you actually prefer scoring scene by scene, or at least to some extent, or do you like to start with a climactic scene? Do you pick certain scenes right off the bat in order to flesh out your ideas?
I tend to work chronologically, but there were certainly moments where, when you get into the last 2 reels where it's pretty much 25 minutes of action without any break, there was definitely a need to sort of get ahead on some of those sequences. So I would often, just work through the film, but then, keep checking in with some of those action moments and just chipping away at those sequences, sketching them out, and so that there wouldn't be this nightmare at the end.
When do you feel you actually can come up with your best ideas? The moment of epiphany, so to speak. Does it just happen, or do you have to reach a certain point of maybe frustration for it to happen? How does it usually work with you, if I may ask?
It's the weirdest thing that it comes at completely random times for me, where the ideas that actually stick. I mean, I can literally be, driving or in the shower, or to my wife's great annoyance, sometimes in the middle of a conversation with her, and there'll just be something that comes into your head, and like many of my colleagues, the voice memos on the iPhone I see on my watch now, it makes it even worse. I'm just constantly singing into my watch little ideas, and there's it's so strange. I think it's partly because when you're in, I'm talking about like the core melodic ideas, or even just a concept. And I try to sketch things on paper, not in huge amount of detail, but just in terms of having like that initial just burst of something, like a spark of an idea. And then I always go to the piano and start to flesh things out, whether it's my acoustic piano or I'm just improvising, or actually my writing rig. And then, you get to a point where, when there's time pressure, it's something you practice, and I think if there's frustration, like you mentioned, that's because the idea's wrong or bad, and you just haven't figured out that, oh no, that just needs to go in the trash and you need to start again. And I spend a lot of time throwing ideas out, actually, and being quite relentless. Like if something just isn't flowing, then it's wrong. I used to always try, I really like that chord change, and like that's just not working. Just store it. Maybe you'll remember it in 10 years and use it somewhere else. But it's a process of being quite relentless with yourself and honest about when something is really just feeling like it's elemental. Like that's such a big word. That's such a grand word for something. The idea that something just feels like it's of the film, like elemental to the film, like it's part of its DNA. That's when you can run with it. And then the process, I try and write very fast so that it's possible to do a lot of revisions and, keep filmmakers really engaged in the process, so that, when they give you a note, you address it straight away, and just keep the flow going. And I mean, a movie like Invisible Man, for example, I had just under 4 weeks to write the whole score. And it was, for me, it was one of the most exciting experiences I've ever had. And it was really important to me, even with that such a short amount of time, to come up with a 90-minute score, to invest that initial time in writing a suite. And that elements of the suite just went straight into the movie without any changes. It's one of the great things about working with Lee Wannell. He's such a great musician and understands score so well. The short answer to your question, I was rambling on here, is it happens at any time, and often in quite inconvenient times, like driving. You get an idea.
Yes, I mean, obviously, when you get an idea, I could imagine you just can't get it down on paper fast enough, or just hum it into your cell phone and try to recreate it.
The weirdest thing, what I've realized the more I do this, is how important it is just to give yourself time to think and to really just sit and close your eyes and really imagine, because I'm aware some of my best ideas I have when I'm asleep. I sort of dream ideas, and if I'm lucky, I can just about remember them when I wake up, but often they're gone. But they're there somewhere, and just kind of sitting quietly and just really contemplating and almost going to like a meditative state is quite a useful thing to do.
Yes,
it's part of the process.
Yeah, and of course, I think breaks are important, and trying to, or let's say, allow yourself to relax in order to start with a clean slate, in order to find inspiration. It's like watching a painting, but you're too close to the painting and you can't quite figure out what you're actually looking at. Then you take a couple of steps back and then you see the big picture. I think that can also be applied to your work or to any director or producer, just to allow yourself to think and to regroup.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I say that, and of course, the reality is you've got to come up with 3 or 4 minutes every day.
I know, yeah, really I know.
and that, so there's a kind of discipline. I mean, I try and get into the studio very early. Doesn't always happen now, especially as I have a toddler. But then do a solid 12 hours, and just really, like, of those 12 hours, you might be like really focused working for 4 or 5 of those. But the rest of the time, it's revising or figuring it out, or just quietly, I think what it is like when you're in that flow state and it's coming out of you and it's easy. That's like one of the most exciting, exhilarating feelings, and that's kind of what you live for. I mean, close to that, or I would say slightly more better is the scoring process when you're in the room with musicians and they're performing it. But it's very exciting when there is that sense of flow, and sometimes there just isn't, and you just have to go, sort of trust that there's a process that needs to happen to get to that point. And for me, it's like I could spend all day trying to fix this one thing, and then suddenly between the hours of like 9 p.m. and 10 p.m., I'll write 3 minutes. It will just come out. Whereas I sort of spent the rest of the day just hammering away at it and not getting very far. So it really depends. And then some days I only have 3 hours to write, and that 3 hours is like, a huge climax of the score. I think it's just like any musician, you just got to practice and
yes,
keep those muscles going, and just keep the discipline of it going, and also make sure that if possible each score is different. I really try and when I'm taking on a film, I'm always thinking, can I do something completely like I've never done before in this score, even if it's a sequel, and that keeps things really challenging, and you're always progressing with the writing.
And of course, when the deadlines are looming and you are under pressure, of course you have to do your very best to come up with 3 or 4 minutes every day, which is a lot. And I think 12 hours a day sometimes, well, let me rephrase, do you sometimes even go beyond the 12-hour mark?
Oh yeah. I mean, there's always a window, normally about a month or 2 away from scoring, where that increases significantly, and I say bye-bye to my family and my friends for a couple of months. Just, but that's also, you got to have a great team, and I'm very lucky to have an incredible team of people who in my studio here at the Scoring Lab in Santa Monica, and they're just Navy SEALs. They work around the clock, to prepare for the scoring sessions, orchestration, programming, getting everything to a point where it's fast and consistent, and there's everyone knows where everything is. There's no hidden accidents in terms of that click is slightly off, or we have a lot of systems to make sure everything is absolutely spot on, so that the only thing we need to think about is the creative.
Yes.
But yeah, it's important to, especially when you're dealing with a lot of music, needs to be recorded very quickly, or very, I mean, for example, Mortal Kombat, because of the way we had to record it, it took a lot longer to record, but that didn't change the post-production schedule. So we ended up having to mix it in a really unusual way with like 3 or 4 mixing engineers all working in tandem. Things like that. You just got to really, make sure that the team you have around you is the best you can find, and you're all sort of working in this unified way.
Very well put. And of course, you, as the composer, have to support your filmmakers in order to find the soul of the movie, and I think you certainly succeed at doing that. And Benjamin, is there anything else you would like to add about your career in general up to this point, or about Mortal Kombat, or about future projects? Anything that comes to mind before we wrap up?
Honestly, nothing that comes to. I mean, you're free to ask any question you like, but yeah, my inner Brit comes out and prevents me from waxing lyrical, unprompted.
No worries at all. Okay, then
Yeah,
do allow me one more question.
of course.
You mentioned the Starling.
Yeah,
Can you already disclose whether or not there will be a score released, be it physical or digital?
there will be. Yeah,
Good, great.
yeah.
And you mentioned it's gonna be rather minimal, so you worked with an orchestra, but I figure you also
Yeah.
incorporated some electronics.
I don't want to spoil it, but yes, it's an orchestral score for sure. We recorded at Abbey Road, and it's a Ted Melfi film, and Ted's movies are just so heartfelt and emotionally powerful. And very funny. I don't know any other filmmaker actually who's able to balance tragedy with comedy in the way he does. It was a really, and it was probably one of the hardest scores I've ever done for that reason, to kind of create, to always allow the audience to laugh, even when there are things that are very tragic, that have just come before or just after a moment of humor. And yeah, I mean, that was a project where there were several versions of the score that we just had to go, you know what, that's just not right. Let's start again. And eventually we found the tone that worked. And really proud of the score. I can't wait for people to hear it, and more importantly, to see the movie. I think it's a very. I know I can't say anything about it, but it's a really extraordinary film. I think it's a lot of people will love it. I hope. Anyway.
Great, looking forward to it. Ben, thank you so very much for taking the time out of your schedule to talk to me today. I had a great time, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation as well.
Yeah, no, it's great to chat. Thanks, Michael. Really great to catch up.
I'm looking forward to chatting again down the road. And thanks again. Take care. Stay safe. Stay healthy.
Yeah, you too, man.
Bye.
Take care of yourself. Bye.